Welcome to our Gwinnett Network pastors, but also others who may be listening in. I'm glad to have you with us today as we talk about the keys with our seniors and helping our senior adults to embrace change. And that is always an issue, and no more so than where we stand now as we're recording this. We're in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. So hopefully you're watching it maybe beyond this, but I know some of you are watching it immediately. So it applies not only now, but in the future. But I'm glad to have several guests with me today. I'm glad to have Tony Hamilton. Tony serves, and maybe that is Tony there. Tony serves as one of our network pastors for senior adults at Annistown Road Baptist Church. Tony, glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
We're glad to have one of our neighboring pastors from the Appalachia Association, dear friend of mine, Jason Britt, who serves at Bethlehem Church and Dynamic Church, doing great ministry. And this church has gone through a lot of changes in the last 5 to 7 years. Jason will tell us a little bit about that. And they've done a great job, though, of bringing their senior adults along through the changes. And then we have Ken Ellis. Dr. Ken Ellis serves at Beaver Run Road Baptist Church. He serves in prison ministry and ministering to prisoners and administrating, and great ministry there. Worked for the North American Mission Board many years, and is one of our network pastors, a very supportive, dear friend, very knowledgeable. So glad to have all you gentlemen. Welcome. Glad to have you here today.
Good to be with you.
All right. Well, let's kind of launch this and talk about shepherding our senior adults through change, a big need for pastors. Tony, let me start with you. Just kind of lay the framework here. And people may know, but the older you are, the easier it would be to know this. But what are the dynamics that make it a challenge for senior adults to change? Because I know for me, Tony, the older I get, the more sentimental I get. And I like to say I like change as long as I agree with it, right? Okay, so but how do we help seniors who grow more sentimental? What are the dynamics that make it a challenge for senior adults to embrace change more than younger adults, do you suppose?
Well, Steve, thank you, first of all, for asking me to be part of this. I am new to the role, just less than a year as the senior adult, our 55 plus ministry is what we call it here. And through that, what I see with my senior adults, and it's probably with others too, is embracing change. Things are changing rapidly for them. And one of the examples I thought of is, years ago, you could just buy a watch. Had a winding stem, you just pulled it out, you set it, you put it back in, you wound it, and your watch went on. But now there's so much going on that watches are tied into your cell phones, and you can get messages on them, and you can talk on them. But that's, they're used to just simplicity, just simple stuff. But the rapid changing in social media, the rapid changing in the healthcare system, and in our government system, it's just the rapidness in them trying to grasp it. It's I think where we come in is trying to, first of all, just calm them, and then little by little teaching them or introducing them to things that change and that they can embrace it. Everything that you do now, cars, everything is just so much, there's so much more involved. But I think that the rapidness of change in their life, and them trying to embrace that, the uncertainty of things and how it's going to work, because there, as you said, it's just like, I know this, I can do this right here, but all this other stuff that's going on, it just confuses some of them. But what I've tried to do is schedule some classes for them, and sit down with them and little by little show them that they can master some of these things or be dangerous with some of these things with their computers. And I've said that just give them enough technology to make them dangerous. And some are embracing it. I think we all know that with right now, Zoom. 2 months ago, what was Zoom? But now our senior adult small groups are having to embrace this and learn. And we still have some that haven't quite gotten there yet, but we have a lot that have jumped on and said, hey, it's not as hard as I thought it was. So it's just embracing that change.
Yeah. when you remember this, this device here is only 11 years old. It's amazing. We can't hardly live without it anymore. It's your phone,
Yeah.
it's your GPS system, it's your internet, it's a camera. It's a gazillion
Yeah.
things all on one device. It's a library, more than Tony and I went to college together, more than was in our university library right here on this phone at our fingertips. It's amazing. And, you know, when you grow up with something, it's one thing, but our seniors, they've experienced more change in their lifetimes than had happened literally in all of history prior to them being born, if you think about it.
Yeah.
And even the last 10 years, the amount of change that's taken place, even a person in their 30s or 40s experienced a dramatic amount of change. So it does make it, you know, tougher for those who haven't grown up with technology, no doubt. Ken, let me ask you a question. We are experiencing COVID-19. I hope we're on the backside of that, but I think we're a long way from being through it, although our churches are beginning to reopen. But how has COVID-19 affected church life of our senior adults specifically? And how should pastors be responding to that, do you suppose?
Oh, absolutely. I joined with Tony. Thank you so much, Steve, for the opportunity, and to the other pastors on this call here today. Really, three words that we kind of use as our stance, our mantra is connect, connect, connect. To be very intentional in how we reach out to our senior adults. And so we are very intentional in making sure that on a weekly basis, we are calling them, we're making some type of connection with them. And so that personal touch, whether it comes from me or the deacons or the executive leadership team at the church, but we've not let a week go by where we've not reached out and make sure that they're okay. And so number one, I would just encourage pastors to make that personal touch, to make sure that they are connecting with their seniors. In our particular church, relationships are very important. We have a very loving congregation, and so it becomes very on a weekly basis that's where we build strong relationships. And so that personal touch that really just adds to that. Number two, I would also say to try to find some type of way for your seniors to remain involved. And so we have three mechanisms by which we are dealing with our services and spiritual growth Sunday school classes right now, whether that's through technology, through using either Facebook or StreamSpot or whatever that mechanism might be, but find some type of way where they can be involved. Perhaps one of the seniors members, we call her our mother of the church. On a weekly basis, she leads our prayer time. So every week at 9 a.m. on Sunday morning, our mother of the church leads our prayer time. And so not only enough to make sure we have that personal touch, but also make sure that we find some kind of way for them to be involved. One of our other seniors is involved in a card ministry. So you're, of course, doing this COVID-19. We've had Mother's Day to come by, and now Father's Day is coming up on Sunday. And so she took it upon herself to develop a card ministry. And so I write a little excerpt of encouragement, and to every one of our members of the church, she's mailing out a mailed out a Mother's Day card, and we'll do the same for Father's Day. And so personal touch, involvement, and then kind of echoing what Tony said, to understand that many of our seniors, technology-wise, are, at least in our church, a challenge. And so we added a component to make sure for those who perhaps are a little challenged with getting on that cell phone, or a little challenged with connecting with the computer, but then also finding a way that, it's not an option, finding a way where they can stay connected, stay safe, yes, but stay connected to the body of the church. And so whether that's through teleconferencing, for them to call in, but we are very intentional to do that. And then fourthly, I would simply say to just make sure that they are in their physical needs are being taken care of. We have a food pantry that we do every week for the community, but we've set aside a time specifically so that particularly the seniors of our church, to make sure just the basics. They don't get to go out to the store as often that they would like. And so there is an effort on our part to make sure the basics, the grocery store run, making sure meats and produce and milks and those very simple things, but to make sure they're without need. And so those are the things that we kind of do intentionally that I would encourage pastors to do during this time.
And that's great. And you just exemplified why some churches are actually thriving in COVID-19. I mean that literally.
Mhm.
And I was observing our Gwinnett churches, and the three things were online delivery. And honestly, some churches had held back on that, just thinking to be over quickly, but you've got to continue to deliver worship and Bible study. Certainly, not only online delivery, but online giving, or multiple ways for people to give, multiple streams. If not, the flow of resources have been cut off. Some churches have not done that, and they're gonna struggle. But the third thing that was less obvious that you mentioned, Ken, was the relationships. And while some churches dialed it back, the churches that were wise dialed it up. And you described several ways to do that. And it's not too late. Well, it's getting too late. But you don't need to wait anymore. You've got to dial up those relationships now. But that's true not just in COVID-19, but any time for sure. Jason, I know your church has gone through some dramatic changes. It was a First Baptist church, and it's Bethlehem Church. Bethlehem, it's still a Baptist church, by the way. But it was a traditional First Baptist church, for lack of a better word. Great church, by the way, even before you got there. But you brought them through a lot of changes, had phenomenal growth. And if you don't know this, Jason's church is one of the fastest growing, not just in Southern Baptist life, not just in Georgia, but in the United States of America. Jason's done a great job there. But Jason, talk to us for a minute about the dramatic changes that your church has gone through in recent years, and how was it that you got buy-in from senior adults? Now, I will add to probably were some you didn't. How do you deal with that on occasion when somebody's just not going to buy in? But first of all, how did you get buy-in? Because you did from a lot of your senior adults.
Yeah.
On your
The vast majority of the senior adults when I got here 9 years ago are still here. I'd probably say what's vast majority, 80 to 90% are still here that haven't left in the midst of all of the change. I think both Ken and Tony kind of hit on two things, and I think communication is the key, and ultimately what Tony was saying in the midst of all the rapid change, I think emotionally speaking, if you can put a caveat or kind of a descriptor upon that generation, they feel like they're being forgotten about oftentimes. They feel like they're being forgotten. It's what they feel. Whether that's real or not, that's what they feel. And so I think that was a big thing. One thing that I encourage, and I'll give you a couple examples here, is that you lead change. You don't necessarily preach change. I think the thing that pastors do is we cast a big vision and talk about a bright future, and that'll get everybody on board. That's preaching. I think leading is more about conversations, though. Leading is more about a one-on-one conversations and a whole lot of dialogue before. You've ever heard the term, Steve? I know you have. You've been in plenty of meetings. The meetings before the meeting.
Yeah, right.
So much of working with senior adults is the conversations before the vision casting, is the conversations before the change. So give me a couple examples of what we walked through. It was a First Baptist, and again, still our roots are Baptist. We still give to the CP, still involved in denominational life. But we rebranded the church to a Bethlehem church. Our worship style went from traditional to kind of blended to very progressive now. Our educational model went from a Sunday school base to small group base. Our leadership structure, our governance, our bylaws went from a congregational form of government to an elder form of government. Our children's ministry, our evangelism model, our community presence, basically everything you can think of outside of the gospel and the inerrancy of Scripture. Mm-hmm. We kept that pretty good. I don't think I'd be on this Zoom if I changed that.
Right.
Steve would have come and hunt me down. He's known me since I was a kid. So none of that changed, but everything else you can possibly think of in about a 3 to 5 year span, we turned over and changed. And I would say this, it was a very rapid change. And I tell guys that if you do it as fast as I did, a lot of places you'll lose your job. I was just in a very fortunate spot where people were ready. So I think a couple of things. In the midst of this, we really differentiated between we're going to do things different, not necessarily we're going to do things right because you've been doing them wrong.
That's good.
So let me say that again. Change is about different, not right or wrong. not good or bad. And you got to think about a senior adult who's given their life 20, 30, 40 years to this one congregation. And truthfully, my generation, I'm 40, my generation doesn't understand church loyalty. And so they don't understand. If you don't like it, you just leave.
Yeah.
That's where my generation is. You don't like it, you just leave, go to the place where you like. That generation before me, my father's generation, really even before you guys, Steve, the generation even before that, there was a loyalty. And so I think a lot of times what pastors have to realize is you're not talking, when you're talking change, what they're perceiving is you're saying what we've done all these years was wrong and you're doing it right. That's not what you're saying. What you're saying is what you're doing now is good and what we did was bad. So we got really good at honoring the past and talking about all that we've done till now has got us here to be able to do what we're going to do in the future, right? We're going to do in the future. That we did a lot of work in conversations and senior adult Sunday school class with senior adult core groups of honoring and blessing the past. And I would say this painstakingly so. And by painstakingly, sometimes I painted a better picture of the past than was actually there just to try to honor and bless them.
Right.
And it was more of what we've done gets us to where we are now. What's the 7 or 8 famous words in church is we've never done things this way. We kind of transitioned it to, isn't it exciting that we're going to get to do it this way? Instead of we've never done it this way, how awesome is the opportunity that now we're going to get to do things that we've never done. And so it was really trying to, I think the other thing was a lot of conversations, not just painting a picture, not just saying, won't this be great? So much of change is moving people from here to there, and pastors believe it's about painting a picture of there. What I learned, Steve, is about convincing them why we can't stay here. It's not necessarily talking about how great there's going to be. It's more about saying, here's why we can't stay here. And so I'd also say data, D-A-T-A, data doesn't lie. And so a comprehensive look at your community and how much it's changed and how much it's grown versus what's going on in your church, that removes the emotion away from the conversation and just brings things to reality. So much of leading change is emotional leadership. It takes emotional IQ and emotional leadership. It's not necessarily reality, because what they feel is everything's changing, I'm losing, when actually 95% of their life and even their church experience isn't changing. They can still come to church. They're still going to hear the word. They're still going to be around their friends. They still have a place. They're still going to be invited to serve. None of those things have changed. It just looks and feels a little bit different. That's it. None of the things that they've become accustomed to has changed. So we just really did a good job at painting a picture of where our community has changed. And Steve, you know the area. We were a small farming community that never wanted to be big. Barrow in Walton County, you moved there because you didn't want to live in Gwinnett.
Right.
And so we had to change the idea from whether you wanted to move to a small farming community, doesn't matter now. There's nothing but people here.
Right.
And so paint a picture of the opportunity. So that was a lot of conversations, a lot of dialogue. Data doesn't lie. What's going on in your community? What's the demographics? And what's the reality in your church? Because oftentimes when that is finally brought to the table, move the emotions away. When that's brought to the table, there's two things. Either the gospel doesn't work anymore or our leadership isn't working right now. Which one is it? The gospel or the way we're leading this thing forward? And I think a lot of times what it does is put it back on us going, we can move and we can change and we can shift. And so we also gave room. Here's the other thing, Steve. We gave room for disagreement, but we didn't stop because you disagreed. I think sometimes senior adults, and again, I'm just going to use our example. When they had barked, everybody had stopped. When they barked, I listened and nodded and we kept moving. Mm-hmm. That's what I would tell you, is that I think ultimately when there was a bark, and hey, what are you doing? We don't agree with this. And I had some pretty hard conversations. I loved them. I listened to them. But at the end of the day, we kept moving forward, and those who barked the loudest are still here, and they can't be more excited that all the work they've done for these years and what God's doing now in their church for generations to come. They are leaving a legacy of ministry, and they see it. No longer do they see it as a loss, they see it as a gain. It just took time. It just took time.
Good. All right.
And then
Jason,
Steve,
you had a question you asked me a while ago. What was that you wanted to ask me?
I was going to flip it back to you because you've done this for a long time, and you would say keys to influencing adults to embrace change. I mean, I hit a couple of things, but what are some keys?
Jason, I'm glad you asked that. And the reality is probably a couple things I say be redundant with what you said, but I want those listening to understand that's by design. If you're hearing something over and over, it's because several people saying it. It really matters, and I think all of you would agree that. Leading adults or anybody, but especially senior adults embracing change, it's relationship. I've heard it said that change moves at the speed of trust. And I don't know if you've ever read Patrick Lencioni, The 5 Dysfunctions of Teams. And the whole thing about trust, it comes down to relationships. I trust you three men because I know you so well. If you told me something hard, I would hear you. I'd sweat over it because I say, wow, because I trust you.
Mhm.
Now, if somebody off the street comes and gives me the same criticism, I'm thinking, well, who are you? Tell me anything. So when I have a strong relationship with me, you can say the hard things to me. You can challenge me. You can stretch me. You can keep me accountable. So I think with our seniors, your relationship with them, you can say the challenging things, the tough things. You can receive those things. Because you know that you're still friends, even if you've got a different opinion or different situation. So you gotta be cautious. It's easiest to develop relationship for those in your life stage peer group. Yeah. And I will say to our younger pastors, that becomes natural. For me, I have to be more intentional about reaching out to younger adults. Honestly, that's where my challenge is. I have to be very intentional about building those relationships. You can't ignore any generation, and I want to say to all pastors, but especially younger pastors, you got to be very purposeful in spending time and building relationships with senior adults. And how a relationship's built, that's time together is the bottom line. You can't get around it. You got to spend time with them. It will serve you well. And here's why. Because when you got a strong relationship, if you want to make a change, a lot of times somebody loves you, don't even need an explanation. They just trust you and trust your heart. So if they trust you, they're willing to follow you wherever you go. So do people trust you because you've got such a strong relationship? So that's one thing I'd say. Another thing I've heard from you guys is letting others weigh in. When it comes to decision making, I'll tell you guys, a lot of times I know what I'm going to do before I do it, but I don't do it yet. I wait and ask other people, what do you think about this? And Jason, you mentioned the meeting before the meeting. Meetings before the meeting where I'll go and I'll throw something out there. I know what I'm going to do pretty much. But what I'll find out is a lot of times people are thinking the same thing and I can move faster. And if I realize they're thinking differently, I may still do it, but I may pause, like I say, Jason, not stop, but be slower because people are thinking differently. I need more time to build, the why and what we're going to do and so forth. So that's another thing is, again, letting people weigh in on the questions. And I like what you said, Jason, even if they have a different opinion, when you're letting people weigh in, they feel that they were part of the decision making, even when you go in another direction, they feel a part of it. So I think that's important also. Another thing I think is important is addressing an issue before it becomes an issue. And I give you an example. And Jason, I know y'all don't do the traditional Sunday school now, but I've been in the Sunday school world, as your dad was for many years. I give the illustration of, you got a small group in a large room and you got a big group in a small room, What's the easy solution? You get the small group to go into the small room, the large group to go into the large room. That's easy. Well, let's go tell them. And you'll find out, no, we don't want to leave our spot. We've got our spot. So what I do, I try to talk about in a theoretical situation, these scenarios. In other words, talk about the problem before it is a problem. Talk about it in a humorous way. Have fun with it. And then say, hey, there's probably going to come a time I need you to change rooms. Just be prepared for that. Yeah. So instead of going in and tell somebody to change their room, I'm going to do something where I have a conversation with people, I'm illustrating it, and I say, it's probably going to come to you eventually. That way they're not being blindsided when I come to them about that issue. So think about those issues with your seniors, when you do that. And I would just add one more thing on diving deep on relationships. Do develop some advocates. I mean, take a deeper dive on some relationships. You know who the influencers are. If not, identify the influencers, and you need to go the extra mile with them on relationships. And not trying to be manipulative. It's so that you know their heart and they know your heart.
Right.
So that when you make changes, they're willing to follow. What would you guys to add to that? What are the keys to influencing seniors to embrace change? Would you add anything to that or emphasize? Ken, how about you first?
Yeah, I would say I was listening to everything that everyone was saying, and what it kind of came to our mind as it relates to change and motivation. We are very intentional as it relates to making sure that everybody knows what's going on in the church. I don't know if you know the history of Beaver Ruin, but over the last few years or so ago, I'm about a year and a half as pastor at the church. But prior to that, they had just come out of a season of deep hurt, had gone through a couple of splits. And so, of course, trust had gone out the window. And so for the first year or so, spent a lot of time making sure that they knew that God, number one, God had called me there, but number two, to make sure that love filled the atmosphere. And so one of the things we did almost from the beginning to make sure we develop a theme, and that theme is we may have just come through a valley, but there's no stopping us now. Mm-hmm. And we're on the move. So to make sure that not only should we love Christ, that becomes paramount. We love each other in the church, but we also love the community. And man, that has sparked a wonderful sense of motivation, regardless of the generation, that everybody has gotten on board. That right. We love Christ, love the Lord thy God with all your heart, soul, and mind. We love one another, but we also, God has given us this challenge. He's given us this commission to love the community. And so evangelism and missions become critical. And we do that without apology. And so right. We found that to be a very motivating act at our church.
Right. And all three of the churches represented here, Beaver Run Road, Annistown Road, Bethlehem Church, all go through big changes. Yeah. Here I am taking this association through changes. And Jason and I went to church together when he was a teenager, a child, and our church went through big changes. So our listeners here, the men here have experienced this, and we want to, not only this webinar, but we want to walk with you through helping you navigate change. But Tony, Jason, would you add anything else about keys to influencing seniors to embrace change? Tony?
Well, I think and Ken alluded to it. I think the overall factor is that they got to know that you love them, and you got to know that they got to know that you have their best interest at heart. And I know here, and I'm sure Jason at Bethlehem, you let them know that you love them, and Ken, you did, and then they knew, even though the change was coming, you had their best interest at heart, and you were leading them into the future. So I think that's it.
Yeah, Jason, I'll let you weigh in on that too. But also, Jason, talk about, you said you did lose 10% of your seniors, maybe, or 5 or whatever. And as a pastor, we don't want to lose anybody. Mm-hmm. Even the change churches. Although we want to go to a church somewhere, but how did you handle that on the losses that you experienced also? So, any thoughts on helping them embrace change, and how did you deal with the losses?
Yeah, I think you guys talked about loving and the pace of change. And Steve, you kind of talked about pausing. One of the best definitions is a few years ago. I heard it and I've written it down because, and tell me if this is not true. I don't know who knows who said what. I don't know whose credit this is for. We'll give it to John Maxwell. He takes them all anyway, Right. So we'll give him credit for this. But I don't know who it is. But leadership at its purest in the local church level is disappointing people at a rate at which they can stand. Isn't that good? Is leading people they think they want this, but you're leading them here, but it's about at the rate at which they can stand. So I think that was a big thing for us. And in that, I do think that, Steve, one thing we've all heard is you got to choose your hills to die on. Right. I think they're just not every hill. So let me give you an example. We're a small group church because of space issues, not necessarily because I'm a fan of one over the other, but I had a few senior adult Sunday school classes. Do you think I made them go be small groups in homes and not have a class on campus? No, it wasn't a hill to die on. It just wasn't a hill to die on. You know what I mean? They
Right.
want community and friendship. So our model for the vast majority of our church is small group, and we call their groups small groups when they meet on campus. And there's only two or three, two actually that meet on campus. Sorry about that. Two that meet on campus. And so I think you got to choose the hills to die on. And for us, I would say even redoing governing things and stuff, Steve, those were last, not first. Bylaws, governance to a senior adult, boomer mentality, that's a big deal. You can lead a lot of change before you ever get to that. That'd be the other thing I'd say is that for senior adult, what's the bylaw? My generation, nobody goes, what does the bylaw say? The generation before, that's all they say, you know? And so that was the last piece. And so I think the gaining trust is putting little wins in your pocket along the way, and you're gaining trust. You know, for the ones that you will lose, literally, I think we did everything we could do to bless and honor them. And what I mean by that is it wasn't never necessarily negative, or it didn't end in any type of vitriol or this, that, and the other. But it was one of those, we bless, we honor, but we're 100% confident of the direction that we're going. I think for us, it's, am I going to be a fisher of men or a keeper of the aquarium? I want to fish for men. I'm not just trying to entertain. And so if that means you're going to lose a few along the way, we do that in everything. And so I think the way you handle it, the way you understand, it's never easy, but it's just part of the deal. I do think the unique thing, this coronavirus and COVID-19, is crisis is an accelerator. And so I do think my encouragement as you're watching this, even though we're not talking about this, there are some things that now just due to this pandemic, because you haven't been meeting together, you can change. And I think as you come back and begin to regather, there's so much garbage and turmoil going on in our world. I just think there's some things that you can pivot and change in this season because of the natural, what we're going through. That's all I would say. I think this has provided an opportunity for change just in the name of coronavirus and the COVID-19. And so I think this is offered a time, Steve, where change has been accelerated, not by our decisions, but by our cultural realities.
True. You know, change always brings about loss of some kind. I mean, it's just, it fits the definition. When it comes to people, I certainly want to be compassionate and understanding, but at the same time, I like, Jason, your quote earlier, I heard from Tom Landry one time, is very similar, said, leadership is getting men to do what they really don't want to do so they can accomplish what they really do want to accomplish.
Sure. That's it.
And but as you do that, some people just not going to move. And I'd had that oldest senior adult class, and people say, what do you do with that class? Sometimes you just plow around them and keep on moving, because we've got to, again, do all we can to advance the gospel, which leads me to my final question I want to discuss here. You know, how is we connect the generations? So important that we do that. We can't overlook anybody. Again, if we want to grow older as a congregation, we've got to lean younger. And by grow older, I don't mean older the average age. I mean, we want to be 10 and 15 and 20 years from now still thriving as a congregation. So if you want your church to grow older, you got to lean younger. We've been talking about senior adults and change. We can't neglect them. So how are you connecting the generations? How are you doing that? Ministering across the spectrum. It's a challenge. It really is. And so Ken, talk about in your church how you're trying to connect the generations.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we really had to do right off the bat was we kind of have this theme with one another and this statement to make space for one another. And by that, I mean that there has to be an intentionality of inviting people from all different kinds of walk of life, from all different types of generational, to come to the table. And when you come to the table, not just for your presence, but also for your participation.
Right.
And so when I got to the church, it was very heavily leadership from the executive team, and those decisions were made directly to the congregation. So we brought in a leadership forum, and in that leadership forum from all of the different ministries of our church, and we're very intentional to make sure that our young adults and those who had not had a voice, I think it's very critical that everyone in the church life has a voice. and that voice is heard. And so it's not just, and we had to deal with that. And Jason talked about that in terms of the disagreements, and it's not, change is not always easy. There are difficult moments. And so our senior adults wanted their voice to be heard, but also there's a generation that comes in their 20s and 30s and 40s that they want their voice to be heard. Our church is a very traditional church, and its leadership is reflective of that. But if anything that is healthy grows. And so our focus was not on growth, our focus was on health. Let's make sure that the church is healthy. We've never had, my wife Penny and I, we have 4 children, and they've all grown up to adulthood. But as I look back over the years of their life, not one time did I ever go into their room and take a measuring stick to see if they were growing. All I had to do was make sure they ate enough food, had shelter over their head, and we had 3 girls and 1 boy. The boy outgrew the girls, and so everybody got a boy, know that they love to eat. And so, but what we discovered is that all we had to do was make sure that they were healthy, and growth occurred naturally.
Right.
Same principle I kind of bring to my pastoring in terms of, let's do the things necessary to make sure that the church is healthy. That's in relationships, that's in our spiritual walk, that's in the disciplines of the things that God wants us to do. And so our theme is to make space for one another. We're going to, can we agree that we're going to do what's necessary to make sure that the voices of our younger generation are heard, and then we're going to implement it. Right. It's not enough to be at the table with your presence. It's not enough to be at the table to participate, but then we're going to implement. Right. We need to make sure we'll move forward that which has been suggested. And so that's what we found. We focus on health of the church.
All right. Tony, Jason, since we're trying to wrap this up for the next few minutes, Tony, I'm asking you just bullet point a couple of things real quickly about how your church is connected to generations. What are you guys doing at Annistown Road to do that?
I'm going to follow up with Ken. And I heard this, including them, making them part of the process. As you're changing along, you have a gambit. You have young and middle and old all working together to implement the change. So they feel that they're part of that. They're part of the change, and not, you're not separating them. And very quickly, I know with the senior adults, when I plan something, it's a senior adult event, but everyone is included. Everyone is invited. And if there's a young person that wants to go, come on. I mean, we'll take you. But we're not excluding, because right now everyone needs to know that everyone is loved and you're part of the process.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Ken's church, being very traditional, has gone through change. Tony's church has gone through a lot of cultural change over the last years. I was interim pastor in that church about 15 years ago. It's changed a lot since then. And Jason, a very progressive church that's changed from traditional to progressive. So Jason, just bring us to a conclusion here. Any final thoughts, but also weighing in on that subject of connecting the generations and how you do that.
Yeah, if they feel apart, they'll be apart. That time, if they feel apart, they'll be apart more than anything. I think we draw lines between generations. It's funny how Gen Z, Gen X, or Gen Z, Millennial, Gen X, Boomer, Buster, you name it all. We draw hard lines in Scripture, and we've even been reminded of this in our culture with the things that we've seen played out, is that we're real quick to draw lines, and I think we do that in the church. And the only line that Jesus never drew lines between good and bad people. If you look, that's what drove people crazy. And so I think that the thing that I look back and the line that Jesus does draw is between pride and humility. And so that line's that God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. Mm-hmm. That's a line. And so I think in this, we modeling humility, and humility is, pride is, I don't understand, and so you're wrong. Humility is, I don't understand, but I'm willing to listen. You know what I mean? So I think us modeling that as pastors, what we're seeing play out in culture on bigger things, I don't understand you, so you must be wrong. And so in the midst of change in a church and dealing with senior adults, I want to lead through humility. And so let me give you a real bright example of how we did this. When we moved our music style from more hymns and choir to choruses and band driven, our worship leader would go, our senior adults had a once a month luncheon at the church. Our worship leader would go and teach them the songs before we ever played them on a Sunday.
Okay.
He would go and play a couple of the tunes. We don't do that anymore, obviously. These are the early days of change. But he would go and play a couple of them of tunes and would engage them and say, what do you guys think? Do you like it? What part? And it made them feel a part. They felt a part. We were going to do the songs either way. But it made them feel a part. And so they were a part as the church went through that. So I think it was the humble, the confident humility, not the humility that's weakness of I'm letting you walk over me, but the confident humility, this is where God's got. And so that was just a way we blended through music different generation styles by humbly going to them and saying, here's what we're going to do. Here's some of the songs, instead of saying, hey, you just better like it. It's the way we're doing it now. So I think that posture of humility in conversation, pride is I don't understand you, so you're wrong and I'm not listening. And humility is I don't understand why you're getting bent out of shape, but I'm going to be willing to listen because I love you, kind of what you guys are saying, because you matter. So that's just something we learned in the conversation.
Now, with that, also, I know you're a worship pastor, and again, very humble and relationship driven with those seniors. So, pastors, wow, what great wisdom I have with me here today. I hope you've enjoyed this. And this is about shepherding your senior adults through change, but you've learned a lot about just leading change in general. I hope it's helpful. And we're looking forward to the Gwinnett Metro Baptist Network. Man, we're on the move. God's doing good things, and we want to provide a lot of opportunities for you. Through not only webinars, but in-person cohorts and training. And I'm open. Who do you want to hear from? What do you want to hear? Please email me, steve@gmba.org, and we'll deliver that content in the days and months moving forward. Check us out, GwinnettMetro.net. A lot of new things going on, a lot of missions opportunities, promoting benefits exclusive to our pastors, training and equipping. And I'm just excited about the future, where we're seeking our vision is every church thriving and missionally engaged. And this is part of that, helping you to thrive by, as Ken said, being healthy and shepherding your senior adults through change. So it's been my pleasure. Men, thank you so much for being with us today.
Bless you. Thank you.
I bet you're great friends. And anyway, to our pastors watching online, thank you so much. And let us know what you thought of the webinar. And please email these guys. Real quick, last thing, give a quick email, Ken, email for you.
Amen. You can just do that at hilltopper747@gmail.com.
Jason, email.
JBritt, JBRITT @bethlehemchurch.us.
And then Tony.
Tony.Hamilton@arbc.org. Tony.Hamilton@arbc.org.
And then Steve@gmba.org. So email us. We'd love to hear from you. God bless you. Have a blessed day.